Are the Cupcake Mix Papers really beginner friendly? I'm going to share with you 5 things that I love about these cupcake papers. Then I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to use these. And then I'm going to share 5 things that I don't love about these papers. So first up, what I love about these papers is how easy they are to use. Everything you need to know about how to use these is right here on this notepad. Right on the front, it tells you how many recipe cards there are in here. It gives what you need to make them, and it's cute that it's set up as a recipe. They are honestly really straightforward to use, and I just love that about them. Now with this one, it is all half square triangles. But the second thing I love about this is that it gives you some layout ideas right here. So it gives you some block ideas for all the half square triangles you're going to be making. So I love that right away you know if this is for you, if these are blocks that you would be interested in making or not. So the third thing I love is that this isn't the only pad of recipe papers available. This is the second one. There are many different ones available for different layouts, for different designs. So I love that you're not locked into one design. The fourth thing I love is that I think this is good practice for somebody who is just learning how to sew. When you're following these papers, you're going to be sewing along a line, but there's another line there that's a 1/4 inch away. So I feel like it's a good way to practice perfecting that 1/4 inch seam. The fifth thing that I love is that this is such an easy way to grab something and start sewing. You don't need a lot, you just need the papers and you need your charm packs and you can sit down and sew. So if you're not sure about what project you want to make or what you want to sew, but you really feel like you need to get into your sewing room and sew, this is an easy way to start a project without really having to think about it. All right, so let's get started on how to use these. So when we take a look at this, you'll see that it tells us how many papers are in this cupcake mix, and there are 44 recipe cards. Now the recipe cards are these papers here. Then it'll tell you what you need to make this. So you'll need a charm pack. I'm using the Wheatland charm pack here. I'm so excited. It's very fall. I think it's going to be perfect for this. And then you're going to need a charm pack that is for your background squares, and it recommends like a solid charm pack. I got the grunge basic charm pack, so I have what I need all ready to go. I do like that it tells you how much fabric you would need if you want to cut your own 5-inch squares. And then here it lets us know some basic techniques for setting up to use these. Back to my point number 5 for why I love these is that when I open these up, I can literally just get started because I have my background fabric and my charm. So I'm not gonna have to sort through my charm pack yet to pair up light and dark charms. I have my background, I have my charms, and I just grab one of each and can sew. So I'm just gonna set my charms to the side and grab one of each as I need them. So one thing I don't think it's said in the paper, unless I missed it, is about lowering your stitch length. I lowered my stitch length a little bit because I know from using this type of product before that if you don't have a tight stitch length when you're pulling the papers off later, they can kind of get loose. So I am lowering my stitch length. So I lined up the 2 charms and I have the lighter one up like it suggests. I have them right sides together. I'm going to put the paper on top and it says to line them up with the outer pinked edges. And then I'm going to put some pins in, but I'm going to avoid the dotted lines as much as I can. These are so tiny. And so the dotted lines are what we're going to sew on. So I want to try to be as much out of the way of those as I can. All right, and then on these papers, it even tells you where to start. So it has a little star here with start. So it says to sew along 1 and then 2. And then you hop over and do 3 to 4. And then you hop over and do 5 to 6, 6 or 7 to 8. And then it tells you where to cut all of these. So here it does say set stitch length so that it is approximately 12 stitches to the inch. So it even gives more information on here. So it did, in a sense, say to lower the stitch length. I mean, these just have so much information on it. So you're really able to grab these papers, your 2 charm packs, and get started. So I'm gonna sew right along those dotted lines through all of these. So when I get to that point where I need to pivot to 2, I'm making sure my needle is down. I'm lifting up the foot and then rotating to go in the other direction. That way I stay right on that line. All right, so I'm just gonna stretch out the threads a little, and I'm not gonna really cut them because I don't think I'll need to. They'll get cut off when I'm cutting this, and I'm going over to the 3rd row. So I'm more watching the needle to stay on that dotted line, but if you are new to quilting and are trying to get that 1/4 inch perfected, something you could also keep an eye on is the side of your presser foot if it's a 1/4 inch presser foot, and see if you're staying pretty close to that solid line to practice that 1/4 inch. Right, my needle's down and I'm going to pivot. Go ahead and remove this needle because I'm getting really close to hitting them. All right, so I have it all sewn. It's kind of hard to see all the stitches, but I'm gonna get it cut along the cut lines and then we'll press them and I'll talk about what I don't love with these papers. All right, so we're going to cut along all these cut lines. Now I just want to point out to you that there's 2 different outer cut lines for 2 different sizes of half square triangles, and I'm going to cut along the outer one. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the outer first. I'm just going to line up the edge of my slide lock on that line and then cut. All right, so I'm going to cut along the diagonal. I think I could really cut along any of these lines depending on, what I'm feeling. I don't think it really matters at this point which ones I cut. If I put my rotating mat over here, I think I could have kept these together easier and had rotated around to cut these a lot quicker. But I didn't think to bring my rotating mat over. All right, so this is how our little tiny half square triangles will look. Adorable. So now we're going to rip all these papers off. And what I do is I first crease them and just help with the ripping off process. So I'm just creasing the papers. And then I'm just gonna go as gently as possible. Because like I said, I've had trouble before where the stitches kind of get loosened. Right? Oh, see, they pulled out right there. You can see. Pulled out. So I'm gonna stitch that closed. I don't want to forget, so I'm going to go ahead since I'm right by my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch that. So when I sew the next one, I'll probably lower my stitch length even more to hopefully help. But there's one, and I'm going to rip out the rest of these papers. So I just bend, or crease, and I crease both sides, the side with the seam allowance and the larger side. And it came out on both sides. So just for reference, on my machine, I lowered my stitch length to about 1.5. So it isn't like I didn't lower my stitch length at all. This is the same trouble I ran into with the other ones I used. All right, so this made 8 half square triangles, and when I was ripping off the papers, I had 4 that I had to resew, and then 4 that I felt like the stitches stayed strong enough at the ends and didn't come undone, so I didn't have to resew those. So about half. I'm going to turn the stitch length down to 1 later, and I'll let you know then if that helps make sure none of the stitches pull out. But first, let's press these and see how they look. All right, so because these are already trimmed to size, I try to be very, very careful with pressing them because I don't want to stretch them out of shape and make it so that they're not perfect half square triangles. So I'm gonna actually press the seams open. These are just so small, a lot of bulk can happen with these really easy. So I like to get the seam going on its own. So I'm gonna use a roller here to start getting it pressed open, and then I'm going to use my iron for some heat. Just going to set it on the seam. I'm going to try not to press or put any pressure any one direction. I really want them to stay nice and flat and in shape without distorting them any. All right, so this is my 2-inch trim lock, and it looks like this turned out pretty perfect. I am going to use it later to trim off these dog ears. I do not like having those on when I'm trying to sew these small little blocks together, so I'll probably take the time and trim them all off. I just wanted to see if they were turning out, you know, nice and even, and I think they look really good. So I'm going to get the rest of these pressed. I mean, look at these little cuties. They are just tiny and adorable. It would be really hard to make perfect little half square triangles this small right when you're starting out. So I have to say this is a good way to get tiny little half square triangles like this, especially when you're brand new to quilting. But with that said, let's talk about the 5 things that I do not love about these papers. And you probably have already guessed a few of them just from me working through making one of these. Now, the first thing I don't love about the cupcake papers is that they're not reusable. Once I use up this pack for this project, I'm going to have to buy a new one if I want to make something with it again. I really feel like it's better just to invest in a really good half square triangle trimmer or to use one of the methods. There are a lot of them out there that can help you get really good half square triangles without even having to trim them down. I prefer sewing them larger and trimming them down. That's how I like to do it, but there are different tips and ideas out there for doing half square triangles without even having to trim them. Now, the second thing I don't love about these papers is pulling the papers out after I sew them. I absolutely loathe doing that. I find it so boring and so monotonous. I cannot stand it. And that's the same reason I don't like foundation paper piecing. I do not love it at all. I do not like pulling out the papers. I feel like it's just so much waste. I know a lot of people love it. I know that, and that is fine. It just is not for me. And if you do not think you'll like pulling out the papers, it's not going to be for you either. The third thing I don't like is that I do not like pressing half square triangles after they're already trimmed down. That's one of the reasons I stopped using the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer. You trim the half square triangle first when it's folded, and then after you trim it, you press it. The reason I don't love doing half square triangles that way is I feel like it's really easy, especially if you're doing a lot of them and stop being careful because you just forget or you're wanting to speed through it. You'll start pressing them to where you're distorting the shape and you won't have a perfect half square triangles anymore. Fabric is so easy to shift and move around, and it's not a solid material. I really prefer pressing half square triangles first and then using a trimmer and trimming them down. I was very careful with these, so I pressed them really slowly and took a lot of care with it, so they all turned out really, really good. But I honestly just prefer trimming them down after. That's my preference. If you like the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you never have an issue with it, and you want to try these papers, I think they'll work great for you. The fourth thing I don't love is that to be successful with these, you really have to remember to lower your stitch length. I have sewn a whole sheet of these before and forgot to lower it and then went to pull out the papers and it was just a big mess. I remembered to lower the stitch length here and I still had trouble with stitches coming out. So just imagine not lowering it at all and the mess that that can entail. It just really makes it so that it's hard to use these properly because you don't want to have to re-sew it, right? You've already sewn it. So it kind of takes the ease out of making these if you have to restitch some of the areas because the stitches came undone. So I don't love that to be successful with these, you have to make sure you lower your stitch length enough. So with that said, if it's your first time using these, make sure to lower your stitch length and test pulling out the papers and make sure it's enough before you sew all of them. So the fifth thing I don't love with these papers is that I find it really, really boring to use them. You're just following along these lines and you don't really get to see the fabric because the paper is covering it. And then when you cut them and are starting to get ready to move on to the next step, you're pulling out all these papers and you really don't get to see what you're making until the papers are off and you can press them and see the pretty fabric again. So I just find it really, really, really monotonous sewing them. In some instances, like I said on the things I love, if you don't have an idea of what you want to make, it is kind of nice just sitting at your sewing machine and just following along. But it definitely isn't my preferred project to use these papers, if I'm being honest. Now, with all that said, it really is preference, right? Because like I said, I prefer sewing my half square triangles larger and trimming them down to a perfect size. And I know some people who will never trim half square triangles. They will never make a half square triangle where they have to trim it, or any block for that matter, because they absolutely hate trimming. I don't mind trimming fabric. So just like how I don't mind trimming fabric, but I will not rip out papers, some people love foundation paper piecing and don't mind ripping out papers at all. So all of these cons that I have for these papers may not be something that matters for you, and that is okay. All right, so I'm gonna get some more of these sewn up so that I can stitch a few blocks together just to show you how they come together and how they look. And I'll also be sure to lower my stitch length, and I'll show you if I have any trouble with any of the stitches coming out with a lowered stitch length. I think I'm gonna put it down to 1 and test another block. All right, so I put the stitch length down to 1 on my machine. It was really slow sewing at that stitch length, but it was perfect for ripping the papers. I was able to rip the papers off really, really easy. It was a lot faster. I still didn't love ripping the papers, but it was a lot faster and I didn't have any stretched out or pulled out stitches. All right, so I made a star block with these little half square triangles and it is absolutely adorable. I just love how that turned out. It's so cute. It is a tiny block. It is 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. So really, really small, but it is so cute. All right, so that is how you use the cupcake papers. If you have used the cupcake papers or the cake mix papers? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of them. So overall, do I think these cupcake papers are beginner friendly? So honestly, yes and no. I think mostly yes, because they are really easy to use. All of the information that you need is right on the papers. So I think even if you've never sewn before, if you just grabbed a sewing machine, grab those papers and the charm packs, I think you could make half square triangles using these papers. I also think for beginners, it's really good practice for sewing. You can practice following the lines, you can practice 1/4 inch seams. I think they are overall really good practice for a beginner as well. I think the main thing that could frustrate people with these is knowing how low to turn your stitch length to make sure your stitches don't pull out while you're ripping out the papers. I also think if you are really new to sewing and quilting, if you don't understand the bias on fabric yet, it can be really frustrating warping the half square triangles with pressing them. But overall, I do think they are a lot of fun. I mean, look how cute this block is. It isn't perfect, but I think anyone who puts this together would really have fun seeing the results they have with these little half square triangles. And 2-inch half square triangles are not easy to make no matter what. So it is a lot of fun being able to make these tiny blocks with tiny half square triangles. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.